What's up, airplane collectors? Welcome to a model airplane review. I'm your host, Ray. Today I'll be reviewing the 1:200 scale Southwest Airlines Boeing 737-700 in the Heart livery with split scimitar winglets made by NG Model. Item number 05005, released in November of 2024. In this video, I'll do an in-depth review of the model, after which I will list off its pros and cons. At the end, I will decide whether or not I recommend this model to other collectors. The box for this model is a two-piece box consisting of the main box and a cover that slides over it like this. The box and its cover measure 22.5 centimeters long, 22.5 centimeters tall, and 8.5 centimeters wide. I will show you around the box now. This is the front. Here's the bottom, right side, top, left side, and the back side. Included in the box is the model as shown here, fully assembled, painted, and ready to display. Also included are parts for extended and retracted landing gear. For the majority of today's review, I will keep the model with its landing gear extended, but I will show what the retracted parts look like later. Also included is a display stand, product assembly instructions, and a Collector Rewards program card. As their name implies, the instructions include steps on how to assemble the different configurations of the model as shown here. Here's the model itself. I'll give you a quick 360 before we begin the review. The fuselage length is 16.3 centimeters, the wingspan is 17.6 centimeters, and the height is 6.3 centimeters. These dimensions are mostly accurate to 1:200 scale. This model is made primarily out of die-cast metal. The wheels on the extended landing gear parts are made out of rubber. Let's begin the review with the fuselage. Right away, this model starts to do well. The nose shape is pretty good. There's lots of detail in the fuselage as well. I'm going to move down now. Here you can see the various livery details. There's a giant Southwest title that looks pretty good. Here in the light reflection, we can see a crease in the fuselage. This is accurate. The coloring of the paint is also almost 100% accurate. The blue is very good, so is the yellow and the red and the white. So far, so good. No complaints. The vertical stabilizer is also pretty solid. The overall shape is correct. The paint application is good, just like the fuselage. The only issue I have with it is in the recessed control surface detail. Here, you can barely see the recessed detail for the rudder. That, and it's also missing a strut that goes right around where my pointer is pointing. So it's a small detail, but it's something I felt worthy of mentioning. Here's the right side of the aircraft. The story is the same as the left side, so I won't provide as much commentary. Overall, we're off to a really good start, minus that small imperfection on the vertical stabilizer. Next up, the wings. The wings on this model are really nice. They feature the three types of detail we usually look for on the wings of these models, that being recessed control surfaces, which are rather hard to see since they're very shallow, very thin, and some of them are almost filled in with paint, but not quite there yet. Here in the light reflection, you can clearly see the trailing edge control surfaces, but if I were to move it, you can't really see them now. Also, on the ailerons, they're missing the trim tabs, which this is a small thing, but also something that I needed to mention. Painted detail comes in the form of the silver paint on the leading edge slats. This looks pretty good, and the printed detail is more towards the closer part of the wing to the fuselage. This looks pretty good as well, no complaints. Here's the bottom of the right wing. There isn't any printed detail down here because there doesn't necessarily need to be, but it's still very nicely detailed with some control surface detail here and there. Here is one of those rare instances I was talking about where the paint does fill in the control surface. Okay, never mind. Once again, like I said, sometimes it's really hard to see where the control surface's lines are, so that's kind of strange. Now, I'd like to take our attention to the wing root here. The joint between the wing and the fuselage is very good. The gap is pretty small, so the assembly quality on this model appears to be good so far. Here is the split scimitar winglet on the left wing. Overall, the shape is really good. The ends are very sharp, as they should be. And speaking of the ends, there's something rather strange with this tooling that makes the pointed ends of the left split scimitar a bit longer than the ones on the right side. I'll show off the right side shortly so you can get an idea of what I'm talking about, but that's something that we collectors have noticed. Aside from that, these are pretty solid. The angle at which they're mounted is accurate, as you can see here. So if we look at the end of the left scimitar up here, on the top end at least, we can see a splotch of red paint. This is actually a continuation from the red band that we see on the rest of the winglet here. And you'll see on the other side, this isn't present, which is also a testament to the fact that the tips on the left scimitar are a bit longer than the ones on the right side. This red paint splotch is actually present on most of these models based on images I've seen online, and how far they extend out onto the winglet tends to vary on a model-by-model basis. As promised, here is the right side scimitar winglet, and here you can see that the red paint splotch I was referring to is not present, and if you have a close eye, you can see that the tips of both the top and bottom half of the scimitar are a lot less extended out backwards on this side as compared to the left side. Let's move on to the rear of the aircraft for a little bit. Here are the horizontal stabilizers. In shape, overall, they're pretty good. Like the ailerons on the wings, though, they are missing the trim tabs on the trailing edge of the elevators here. Not a small, or it's not a huge deal, but it's something I needed to mention. One thing I did notice is that the seam gap between the left horizontal stabilizer and the fuselage is a little bit wide, as you can see the attachment point here. If we look on the bottom, it's the same case here. You can see the seam gap is a little bit wide. It's not something that compromises the structural integrity of the part, but it is kind of annoying to see. And while we're back here, let's take a look at the APU. The APU shape is really good, and it's accurate to the 737. There we go. That's about the best view I can give you. I'm aware that my hand was shaking in the last shot. The engines on this model are also pretty solid. The cowling shape is very nice. The exhaust section looks really good, and it's painted multiple colors of metallic silver, so that's really nice. The engine pylon is molded into the wing itself, so we don't have to worry about the attachment of the pylon to the wing or to the engine, so that's very nice to see. The shape is correct as well. The fan blade detail on the fans is really nice. They're missing spinner spirals and they don't spin, but regardless, the detail is really good. Now, one thing I would like to discuss is here we see that the engine strake is painted blue. Now, it's a pretty small part, but this should actually be painted white. And I believe due to the part size and the fact that it's molded into the engine cowling, that's probably why it wasn't painted white, but still, that is something that is inaccurate on this model. Now, the underside of the engines feature plenty of printed detail, as you can see here on the bottom of the right engine. There's lots of detail there, all of which looks pretty good, and it's clear and done pretty well. This model features three-dimensional details that come in the form of gemmed lights, 3D antennas or antennae, and a singular sat dome at the top of the aircraft. Right up here, this is the top of the aircraft. These are all of the 3D details up here. The gem light here looks good. The antennae, they look good in terms of their shape, but overall the size is too small. These antennae would go on something like a 1:400 scale model. So NG should probably change up the antennae on their 737-700 mold in 1:200 scale. What the heck was that? Sorry about that. Lastly, the sat dome up here is really good. It's virtually seamless with the fuselage. The fit between the sat dome and the fuselage is really good. On the bottom of the aircraft, we only have antennas. There's no sat domes, and there is one gemmed light. Here in the front of the aircraft, we have this singular antenna. This looks pretty good. Again, the antennas down here are also a little bit too small. Here we can see that gemmed light right in the center of the aircraft there. This looks pretty good. Placement is accurate. And last but not least, we have these two antennas down here. Now, I've seen several reports of these antennas arriving detached or broken from models. So that's been a tendency with these antennas, and I actually had one of these antennas arrive broken on my model as well. Unfortunately, NG missed an antenna here at the rear of the aircraft. There should be a small antenna somewhere around back here, but they just didn't include it on this model. While we're down here, let's talk about the underside of the aircraft. Overall, there's a lot of detail to go around here, but there are a few things that I would like to point out. First, if we look here, I do see that something like the lighter surface underneath the blue paint is kind of poking out here, so the paint application wasn't perfect here. And also this yellow band right here, unfortunately it extends too far out onto the fuselage. Meaning, how I was able to determine this was that this white and yellow band right here, they shouldn't come into contact, if you will, or they shouldn't intersect the path of this antenna. So these are brought forward just a little bit too much. Aside from that, everything else down here looks pretty good. Let's talk about the landing gear for a little bit. As mentioned earlier, these landing gear can be exchanged for extended or retracted. Right now, they're obviously in the extended position. And the way they attach to the aircraft, and by what I mean by they is all of the parts, so the extended and retracted parts, they attach to the aircraft through a system of magnets. And that silver thing right there is the magnet. Now, the extended gear parts are pretty good. The paint application on them looks pretty good. And there's even a blue cover here, which is accurate. The wheels, they're all right. They roll smoothly, but as you can see, they are a little bit imbalanced, which does affect the way that the model sits, but not to a major degree. I'm going to go ahead and remove the rest of the extended gear. Here's the one from the right side of the aircraft. This one is pretty good as well, and as mentioned earlier, the wheel rolls smoothly. And the one for the nose gear, here it is. The wheel does not pivot, but as mentioned earlier, the wheels do roll. Here is what the empty landing gear bays look like. Now, here, there is something I'd like to talk about here. The nose gear bay has rounded edges. Whether or not that's accurate, I'm not 100% sure. One of you guys actually brought this up to me. I didn't notice it before, but if this is inaccurate, you may want to consider that if you're considering buying this model. But yeah, here's what the empty gear bays look like. Now let's attach the retracted landing gear parts. So here's one of the main gear parts. These are made out of plastic, and as mentioned earlier, here are the magnets that fit them into place. Now, assuming I'm putting this in the right place, there we go. Even though they attach with magnets, sometimes you do have to give the parts a little bit of a push to get them to fit flush with the aircraft, and this one is definitely a bit more stubborn here. Gotta give it a good push before it fits, and eventually it almost fits, but the fit really isn't perfect with the wings, so I might have to do some modification there. Now, the nose gear one, it's a completely different story. It's a whole lot better than the first two, and here you can see the nose gear cover fits very flush with the fuselage. Once you have these parts in, they're a little bit tricky to remove, but thankfully we have this thumbtack to use as a part removal tool. Simply stick the tip into the correct gap and the parts will come out. Just be very careful with the paint job because it's very easy to scratch the paint with the tip. The last thing I'd like to talk about with the positioning of the main landing gear, or the extended landing gear rather, is, well, the positioning of the main landing gear. Here we can see that they're slightly slanted backwards. Unfortunately, they're not slanted backwards enough to accurately replicate the 737-700 landing gear. This doesn't threaten the integrity of the model sitting on its landing gear. It's more of just a positioning imperfection. And also, you might notice that the nose appears to be a bit taller than the tail, but this is not the case. It's just the way that the model is sitting on its box right now. Here's my signature steering contest. The cockpit window printing on the fuselage looks good. Might be ever so slightly slanted, but nothing really worthy of writing home about. Gear balance looks good. Engine clearance looks good. Wing balance and wing flex looks good. The horizontal stabilizer angle might be asymmetrical, and the vertical stabilizer is definitely tilted off to the right side of the aircraft, the left side of your screen a little bit. So yeah, not totally perfect up here, but still pretty solid nonetheless. Last but not least, the included display stand. It's made out of both metal and plastic. The part that grips onto the model is made out of a rubbery plastic material, which is optimal for gripping the model. And the assembly of this display stand is actually quite complex compared to other stands on the market, but thankfully we have the instructions to help us assemble it. And the way that this stand holds onto the model is through a set of clamps here at the top, and they hold onto the right and left wings respectively. Now, the way the stand is designed is smart, but it's also very tricky to put the model on the stand. You have to be very careful with it because it's very easy to break or damage the antennae that are down here, and I'll show you how that works. So if I were to try and put the stand directly over the antennae here, you can see it's very easy to damage that one right there. So the way I do it is I put the left clamp on first, so I avoid the antenna, and then I eventually just get the right one to slip over it, so that way the stand does not contact the antenna. Once the plane is on the stand, it's very rigid. The plane doesn't even wiggle, so the stand does a very good job of holding the aircraft. Now, if you want to display this with the gear down on the stand, I don't recommend trying it. It's possible, but it's really difficult, and you run a serious risk of damaging the main gear and the gear bays of your model. This concludes my review. Now it's time for for the pros and cons. The pros of this model, what does it do well? It's a very accurate replication of the real aircraft. The tooling for the model is really good. Overall shapes are accurate throughout. There are a few features missing here and there, like the trim tabs, but those are really small details, and I think I can let that slide. The paint application and the paint colors are fabulous. The way that NG did delivery on this model was really good, and overall it's very nicely detailed. The accessories, such as the display stand and the landing gear parts, those fit to the model really good, and overall they're a lot better than what else is on the market. Now let's go over the cons. What does this model not do well? The main gripe I have with this model is its quality control. I've seen multiple examples of this model arrive with broken antennae. Like I mentioned earlier, I received a similar one with broken antennae. We've also seen issues such as messed up split scimitars, like they're off at an angle or something due to an impact. We've seen paint smudges. So quality control, be wary with it, but for the most part, the issues that I've seen with this model are mostly fixable. So therefore, I do recommend this model. Overall, it's a beautiful model. Once again, it's accurate. The paint job is really good. You just got to be really careful with that quality control because sometimes you might get a bad apple and something comes in broken. But as mentioned before, some of these issues can be fixed. That's all for today. Thanks for watching. As always, if you have questions or feedback, be sure to leave a comment down below. If you're new to the channel, be sure to watch my other videos about model airplanes. And if you'd like to show the channel some support, be sure to like this video and subscribe so you never miss another upload. Happy building, happy collecting. Please take good care of yourselves, and I will see you next time.